morning. Mr. Weir, can you tell us a little bit about what your life was growing up in 1950s Australia? Can you paint a picture for us of the life in 1950s Australia?
Well, I guess any era is really more resembles an earlier era. Probably 1950s Australia was probably like 1930s Australia. It was quiet. It was very conservative in its kind of daily routines. I came to understand more about it, of course, as I got older. For me, I was always hungry to travel. But I lived by the sea and was always swimming, like my friends, spearfishing. The water was at the playground. I was always going to the beach. Later, I was a little severe in thinking my family and friends were very conservative, and that was a wrong thing, until I realised they'd fought a war. And I realised then later that so many of my father's friends just wanted peace and quiet after having, 5 years of war.
What is your earliest film memory? With a lot of cinemas where you grew up?
Yes, it was as a boy going Saturday afternoon to the flicks, as we called it. And it was probably similar to a lot of the American experience. I've noticed with that generation that I'm part of, the Spielberg, Lucas kind of generation, it was Saturday afternoon serials, where you could see later the genesis of Raiders of the Lost Ark type thing, even Star Wars. And so you love the serial, and then I particularly liked westerns. So my first real love was westerns, Hopalong Cassidy. Horror films I loved, particularly from England, and the thrill of being frightened. But my first real movies, I think, first one was an Australian film, which was unusual. There weren't many. Charles Chevelle made a film, Jeddah, which you may have had here, I don't know, about a love story between a tribal Aboriginal and a detribalised Aboriginal woman who was adopted by one, and he kidnaps her in a way, and it becomes a pursuit. Anyway, as a child, I was absolutely stunned to see, this was our country in full colour, beautiful film. So I remember that, and then slowly came landmark films as I got a bit older.
What was the most important part of your early filmmaking education?
Oh, I hate to think of it as an education. It was because of such pleasure. I never thought of being a director. There was no concept like that, in a way. As I got, to my teens, movies were just part of your life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I went, as you did, regularly to the movies. We had television. Television also was a very big influence, maybe bigger than movies, on my unconscious. Because it was a great era of television. It came in 1956 in Australia. And my father loved it, I loved it, and we watched again a lot of westerns and comedies, and very high standard. And there were Twilight Zone, I loved that. So what I didn't know is I was absorbing all of these things. But I didn't think about movies for some years. And when I came back to Australia, when I was made my first film at about, I was 22 or 23, I think. What I came to want to do was to get into what I thought of, show business. I wanted to entertain. I didn't know if a writer maybe or actor. Again, didn't think about the camera. But I wanted and felt I was destined for an artistic life, in a way.
But you didn't study filmmaking, you studied law, correct?
Yeah, just for 2 years. I was a dropout. Don't forget, this is all the time the 60s is coming, so the storm clouds of change. We're in the war in Vietnam. There's a little undercurrents which will break out later in the All I wanted to do was to travel. And so I guess I wasn't a good student, I dropped out, then I sold real estate for a while. My father was a real estate agent. And I made enough money to buy a one-way ticket to England, to London. And those days it was cheapest by ship. So I went a 6-week journey from 5 weeks from Sydney to Piraeus in Greece on a Greek ship, passenger ship, 700 passengers. And that was my rite of passage. That journey changed my life. I was, as I think I said, 20. And on board, I got involved in entertainment for the passengers.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, it started with GIFF's Review, which is, you know, an obvious one. We're crossing the line, the equator, we put on a show. The Greek shipping people didn't have any entertainment planned. And we found a little studio on the top deck with a camera. And we said, what's that for? To the purser. And he said, we've never used it, but sometimes if the captain wanted to make an announcement, he could use it. And we said to go to all the bars and the lounges. That we saw TV sets. And he said, yeah, sure. And, you know, it's like Mickey Rooney. Like, hey, can we do a show? Let's put on a show. And so we put on an interview type show in which there were 3 or 4 of us all interested in this. And so one of us played the Tonight Show host. So we had 5 or 6 editions of this show at 6 p.m. at night. This was the only entertainment in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean. And then we played the part of guests who were apparently passengers. Eventually the show was banned by the captain because I did a report on the state of the lifeboats as an expert, a lifeboat expert. And they were very angry. But when at its peak, when it was going really well, 700 captive audience, they had Greek content, they had the news read in Greek, they put that on first, then we did the show. So when I got off the boat, I was hooked. I mean, this was it. You know, there was no going back to real estate.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your experience working on the Channel 7 Staff Social Club Christmas Review, and later the Marcus Branston Show?
When I got back to Australia, I wanted to find work in the entertainment business. I tried theatre, maybe I could work backstage, nothing. I had no qualifications, no degree, nothing. I was married. My wife a teacher.
You met on the ship?
Met on the ship.
Another highway.
We went together on it. We met in London. But she helped on the show, yeah. So I got a job as a stagehand in a Sydney television station, putting sets up like this. This would be a morning's work, putting the flats up here, and getting the chairs ready, that kind of stuff. Hammer, overalls, and I loved it. But I said to them, do you have a Christmas party? You know, they said yes. I said, what do you do? And they said, oh, you know, we have drinks. And I said, well, why don't you have a show? I mean, why don't you put on a review? I mean, we're in the business of television. Why don't we, you know, make up a review? So I wrote a review with others, worked all year on it, and then I said to them, will you loan me a camera and will you give me processing from the laboratory, 16mm, and I'll shoot a little film for the review? And they said, sure. So they gave me the equipment and the processing. And so that first film was entirely, you know, funded by the station. The only problem was the night of the performance, there was only one performance, Christmas. A theatre a bit bigger than this would be, you out here would be all the staff. After interval, my film was to come on. The laboratory had failed to print the soundtrack, so the film was mute. And the film was made like a propaganda film from the government, and the story was that at 65 you had to be killed. You had to commit suicide. And all the money the government normally spent on old age and health would be devoted to when you were younger. This was the deal. The state would keep you healthy as long as you left at 65.
It's like the American healthcare system.
Okay, so here we are, the night of the show. No soundtrack. So I grabbed a mic like this and sat down in the front row and did the narration and the sound effects. And only the people beside me knew what I was doing.
Like a radio show.
Yes, but, you know, so I would say on the original soundtrack it was a cold morning that morning in Sydney when Count Wim prepared for his last walk. Something like that. And then I would have wind blowing, and so I had to do all the sound effects, you know, so I'd say, it was a cold morning in Sydney when Count Wim began his last walk. His feet crunched on the gravel. Hello, good morning. Did it like that. And when I came back to the laboratory the next day, they said, oh, I'm sorry about that, we'll marry the soundtrack. And I said, no, I want to do it like that again. So we recorded it, and that's the soundtrack. And I went on to do another one the next year. It got more elaborate. Then they promoted me to do film clips for variety shows. So I was sort of launched, really, through that into film.
And you had to do the entire process, I imagine. You were your own editor as well?
Yes, I did a little bit of editing. No, I had somebody, because being at a television station, you had access to editors. The funny thing was, in that first film, on the credits, I put producer Peter Weir. And somebody said to me, no, you were the director. And I said, who cares?
As a young man, how did you resist the temptation that so many other Australians had of immigrating to the UK and the USA early in their careers? And why did you decide to continue working in Australia?
Well, you know, I think my generation was the first generation in the arts come back to Australia. So we had our trips to Europe, to England essentially. In America, no one went to America in the 60s or 70s. Not even for holidays much. It just wasn't in your consciousness. Everything was Europe. Everything was England. So they came home and began making movies or opening or dress shops, and an injection of vitality came from this generation. Once before us, because there were so few interested in artistic things, went to England and painted their pictures and wrote their books. So this was a big change. And it was very exciting. Sydney was a very exciting city in that period. I think it's another period now, but you know how the cycle goes. Cities and countries have their time, and then it goes and then it comes back. So it was very exciting. And there was protests. The anti-war movement was, for us young people, a very big thing, and marches and moratoriums, and just like the United States. And only later did the thought of going to America enter anybody's head, because the government was putting money into the film industry.
And do you feel that the fact that you weren't exposed to the UK system, do you feel that, do you consider that an advantage to yourself, that you cultivated this other system in your native Australia, and then when you went out into the world, you had a different background or perspective?
I haven't thought too much about it, but I think, you see, I was living in the world of film by now. I mean, what I haven't mentioned is the Sydney Film Festival, which was really taken over and really made a wonderful festival by David Stratton. He's still a very prominent critic and around the world. So he got a really good contacts in the 60s, mid to late 60s, 1960s, and we had the best of European cinema and world cinema and the best of American cinema. You know, you got John Cassavetes stuff came out. So I was living in a kind of extremely sort of creative atmosphere from that festival. We talk about the films and we know of them. So already Yeah, I was in a sense not thinking about the social situation or anything else. It was just movies.
And did you find that coming from Australia, that whenever you traveled outside your country, you felt like you were a fish out of water? And do you feel like this feeling had a big impact upon the stories that you portray on the screen?
A fish out of water is a horrible thought. Flapping on the floor. No, I was a fish in water, but I just had to have a travelling tank. I think this sort of artistic personality, if I can call it that, which is not necessarily a virtue, it's just a type of person. Doesn't mean you make good things, but if you have that kind of personality, and you do find a métier for your talent, if you have it, you have to have it, then I don't think you really entirely belong anywhere. You can move, I'm always fond of thinking of, Van Gogh as a Dutchman, but he was a long way from Holland, he did his Dutch pictures, but the ones we know are painted in France. There are many instances of artists who've needed to travel after a period in working in their home country. I think I took a long time to become comfortable in Australia. I think I felt European from that first 20-year-old lad travelling in Europe, hitchhiking after the ship. I slept one night in a field in Spain, I remember, and I had in those days you could hitchhike without problems. Studenti? Yes, studenti, And you'd have your bottle of wine and your loaf of bread and your sleeping bag, and you'd stop sometimes in the countryside. Stop. Here, thank you, gracias. Get up, look around, go and sleep up there under the tree, have your wine, eat your bread, look up like that. And one night it was like Eureka for me. I'm a European. My family had been Scottish, Irish, or Scotsman 2 generations. But I thought, this is where I belong. And then went to see England, and I didn't get to Scotland eventually, but didn't feel I belonged there. So it wasn't like I was English. I was just European. So over the years, in the background, this may have worked its way into some films, not feeling quite comfortable in a way, or not settled anywhere. I think some of that came out in living dangerously. Now it's gone. So I'm very comfortable in my country and love it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working on a set, on a Ken Russell set in London?
Yes, I got a grant and went back in 1971. So I'd been back in Australia, made those little films, worked at the television station, and I got a grant from the Experimental Film Fund to go to Europe and spend time on feature film sets. So there I was on Ken Russell's set, assigned to the special effects department, physical effects. Ollie was my boss, to spend a couple of weeks, and they were shooting, Ken Russell was shooting The Boyfriend, very lavish sets in the studio of the 1920s filmmaking. And Twiggy was in the cast. And Ken Russell, for fun, had dressed like those days with the breeches, and he had a riding crop that he would hit on his leg, I was giving directions. So Ollie and I arrived on, and here was I, wide-eyed from Australia, my God. And what a fascinating thing. And then suddenly there was a shout, "Oh, hey, special effects. What is it?" He had to hurry over to the director. He hit his riding crop, which had a head of a dog on it. And it was in ivory, and the dog head broke off the whip. So he said, the AD said, "You boys take this to the workshop, fix the governor's whip." So he left this beautiful set to go into the workshop, put the glue on the head. And Ollie said, "We'll be here half a day, mate. We can go to the pub." And I said, "But I want to go back to the set." He said, "No, you don't." Anyway, weeks passed it elsewhere.
Yeah. As a young filmmaker, who did you admire the most?
I think influence is creeping in. It began in the strips. All sorts of people influenced me. Jacques Tati, for example, younger. I loved his Monsieur Hulot. Then I was terribly interested in Nick Rogue at one point, and then Roman Polanski, and then towering above them was the Colossus of Stanley Kubrick, I think. And so I just was fascinated with what he was doing, and it was like a, I don't know, unique kind of experience, because he seemed to destroy the wall between art and what we then called commerce. There was a very, even sometimes snobbish view of a commercial film, which unfortunately implied that the people who went to it were stupid, the public. And there was an elitism about art house films, some of them bad films, but they were spoken of with reverence. And you should not cross the line. That would be considered a betrayal, and you will be dismissed and shunned. Stanley Kubrick had no barriers, no wall. And he, I remember the phrase, I think it was Beethoven said, "Oh, I embrace you, ye thousands," or something. And so Stanley Kubrick, like Beethoven, seemed somehow to embrace the millions. And he did, and yet didn't cheapen his work. This was high art, I think. He always took subjects which were very simple in their core, but that was important. So he was my, carried a light into the darkness for me.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your first big break in Hollywood?
Big break. I was offered a film after Picnic at Hanging Rock, my second film. I was over in Los Angeles helping with the producer, raising money for my next film. And I got an offer from Warner Brothers to do a film called Salem's Lot. And this had come via Stanley Kubrick. Stanley had seen Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Cars. He'd seen both films, he saw everything. And he passed on Salem's Lot because he moved to The Shining, as I later know. But he said, "You should give this to Peter Weir." And so I was flattered, amazed, took the script away to read, and worked with a Romanian writer, Petru Popescu, at the Chateau Marmont, which is a spooky place anyway. And one night we were working on it, and Petru started to look a bit strange to me, and it was a vampire story, this Salem's Lot thing, and he sort of went like that, said, "Haven't you noticed?" Anyway, I found I couldn't do it. I couldn't get into the story. I couldn't believe it. I would have to make a comedy of it, which would be awful. And I also found that because I never liked vampires, I thought they're a metaphor. What for? Just pure evil, I think. So I found I had to immerse myself in a sort of vat of evil to make the film, to make it powerful, which I couldn't do. So I said, "No, thank you," to the amazement of Warner Bros. And the man who wanted to be my agent. He said to me, this guy who was going to be my agent, "You're going back to Australia?" "Yeah." He said, "Damn it, do you know there are people here who would give their right arm for what you've been offered?" And I said, "Oh, really?" And any time I returned to Hollywood, I used to look to see how many one-armed people I could see. There's quite a few. So I went back and made several more films at home until I was ready for change, really, after the year of living dangerously. So I'd made, I think, whatever it was, 5 films, 1 for television, 6 films, something like that. And, I needed fresh landscapes, fresh stories, change, really.
it sounds like you had temptations, or you had opportunities to go to England, or you had opportunities to go to the USA. But
no, not to England. Not offers or anything there. No. There was so much happening at home in Australia that it wasn't on my mind. Yet I think all filmmakers are drawn to Hollywood. That's the first thing you have to say. Drawn by the history alone. And drawn by the films they saw as children. I mean, you know when you see something young, when you're full of wonder, it has such a deep impression. And it's maybe less so today with so many screens in people's lives, but in those days to see a big film. So it was interesting to go there, but you had to go, in my view, on your terms. And you had to go, in my view, with deep experience. So that when I sat opposite them, I could talk the talk, but also I could sometimes know more than they did about this script, this subject. So that's how I was when I finally sat with them about doing Witness, my first film, 1984. And I was ready to do it. And I was not intimidated, despite having to meet with Big Star and so forth.
What made you think that you could take the risk of casting non-professional actors or comedians or people who weren't known for serious acting or dramatic acting, such as Harrison Ford, Robin Williams, and Jim Carrey in serious dramatic roles? So what was the precedence, or what made you think that this could be possible?
Well, I think it all began with that first film. As you start, so you finish. You have to start well. And it was a good start for me working with American studios. But I have to tell you this. They sent the story Witness, the script, fiction, film. I went and met Harrison Ford. He was the gatekeeper. He kindly invited me up to his house. We spent a few days in his ranch up in the mountains. We got on very well together. I flew back to Los Angeles and they said in a meeting, all executives, Jeff Katzenberg and others, well, Harrison called and he you got on well, you guys. And I said, yes. He said, okay, let's go do this. Now here's the critical moment. I said, well, before you do that, what I would like to do is to tell you the story of Witness. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'd like in my own words to stand up here, take 10 minutes or a little more, and I will tell you the story, how I am going to do it. And they laughed, and Jeff Katzenberg said, you're going to pitch a film to us that we're offering you. And I said, yeah, you could say. But you will know what I am going to do if you hear me. He said, okay, go ahead. Everyone chuckles, this was odd. But I planned it. And so I stood up and I said, it sounds like the Count Viv. I said, crunch. I said, we see a field of billowing wheat blowing in the early morning breeze. Then across through the wheat come strange shapes. What are they? Black hats. Up through the wheat come a crowd of people dressed what? For a fancy dress? Or what? Are they in Europe? And they cross down to a road and a carriage goes past. It must be a period. And on screen comes the sign that says 1984, Amish country or something like that. And then went on to do the whole film in 15 minutes. And they said, well, I can see the picture better, said Jeff, than the script. And I made some changes in it, which I then put into the script. But so successful was it that when I came to do Dead Poets Society with Jeff, he said, I want to invite you to dinner and for you to tell me the story. So that's how I began. It was my show. It was my film, and they were financing it, and so I launched off into that world wonderfully. and then took the picture to cut in Australia. From then it was always get in, shoot it, go home. Keep America foreign, keep it strange. I didn't want to become too familiar with it, because if I did, I felt I'd lose something. So coming back to these actors, Harrison was taking a risk. He had not been successful as an actor outside of his enormous hits of Star Wars and Raiders. But when he tried a few drama roles, he was a little self-conscious, or the films hadn't worked. But he wanted to roll the dice again and try something else. So when you work with a movie star, I realised, who is going to take a risk rather than be conservative to protect their stardom, it's very exciting, because together you are going to take this risk. And he depends on you, and you depend on him. And then I had that happen with Robin Williams and with Jim Carrey. Similar situations with their differences, but it's exciting. The worst situation would be to be with a star who was deeply conservative and fearful of losing what they had.
What do you think these types of actors who are not trained as dramatic actors, or they're comedians, what do you think they can bring to these types of roles?
Well, it's the very quality that made them a star. The camera likes to look at them, in the case of Harrison. I think it's ideal if you have both, if you had, the star power and training. I always love the quote of Ingmar Bergman, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Bergman, you've discovered so many actors." And he said, "No, I haven't. I always chose highly professional theatre actors. It's the best way," which I think is true. But nonetheless, the camera loves certain faces, and I think this system, by the way, we must say, is gone. In my era, it's gone. I don't think there's any, maybe one or two movie stars now, but not a bunch of them, as there was in the 70s, because of the changes that have occurred.
But do you feel like a comedian like Robin Williams can bring more humanity to a role than, say, a dramatic actor? Maybe?
No, there's no generalising. Robin was a unique character. I mean, he was just not like anybody else. It's a terrible tragedy. He died in the way, in the circumstances. He was a curious man. And the only time we could do any work was just like the two of us. We could talk seriously about how much comedy we could squeeze in without making the teacher Robin Williams all the time, an entertainer. But if we were in a hotel or something, if the waiter came in with a coffee, he changed, Oh, hello, the waiter, he's got his coffee. His grandfather was a waiter, but then no. Very, very fun.
Did you feel echoes of Peter Sellers and Strangelove and Lolita working with these?
Not really, no. I would love to have worked with Peter Sellers. I grew up listening to the Goon Show on the radio, and he was obviously part of the cast. And I thought Stanley Kubrick used him so well, in Dr. Strangelove. I enjoyed talking with Stanley about that later when I met him. It was a shame we lost him. So yeah.
So this idea of pitching the studios the story that they're trying to hire you for, why did you come up with that idea? Had you already been warned about the studios?
It just occurred to me. But then I think I was probably, I did some acting, younger in the reviews and so I had some lack of fear to act it out. But also I was always trying to get another angle on my own scripts. I don't know when I started, but I would record them at home, Australian films even, before the film was financed even. So I'd sometimes do sound effects, on the table, but I'd do all the voices. Not day interior, I'd just say, like a radio show. He came into the room, he sat down, he looked up, Billy Kwan came in carrying his camera. He says to him, "What is it, Billy? What do you want?" So do the whole thing, put it on cassette, and put it in the car. And because I live about an hour out of the city, so it's a lot of driving. So I would put the script, I'd record it on cassette. So I'm driving and listening to it like a radio show. And I thought, oh my God, that doesn't work, you know, or that's good, or what's wrong with that? Or, because you've got just that distance from it. Sometimes I'd write them as short stories, take the script if it was original and put it into a short story form. Trying to get it, it's another way of looking at it, really.
But that strategy for basically pitching it to the studio, is this to avoid any sort of problems down the line in terms of the script changes? And
probably to some extent, but I think mainly it's to excite them. I mean, when I went in to meet Sherry Lansing about the Truman Show, Jeff Carey was involved and was still working out the budget or whatever, but this was our first meeting with her. And I was very excited by a piece of music my son had given me. He said, I think this is your film. This Pink Floyd track, Wish You Were Here. And he was right, you know, this was the movie synopsized in a song. So I came in to meet Sherry with the music. And, you know, hello Peter, and nice to meet, and exciting, and thing. I said, I want to play you the movie. She said, what? You know, and I said, can we put this on your sound system? This is the film. You know, and so, ha 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 ha, we put it on, and she listens to it. I don't know what she really thought, but I said, can't you hear it? That's how this movie will be. And I think she got excited, or maybe she was excited because I was. But it broke up the conversation out of all the channels that these things go in all the time, you know, about rewrites and budgets. And, you know, you have to have some enthusiasm about what you're going to, you know, spend the money on, I think.
It's more about capturing the imagination.
I think so, yeah. Because if I'm there, I'm excited. That's why I only took films that I could do this with. I could never take a film just because it was a good script, but I didn't feel excited, because otherwise I can't communicate that to particularly executives.
Speaking of casting decisions, I understand that Sylvester Stallone at one point was considered for the role of John Book in Witness. Was this under your watch, or was this before you came on?
Before, I think, yeah. Dustin Hoffman was interested, I know. It floated around a bit. So did the Truman Show. There was, they were both considered writing samples, and the agent representing the writers had circulated it, you know, to really get them hired to write other movies, not those. But they were good enough that people got into them. It could be good. Who's the director? That's what they would ask.
Do you think of Witness as a Western?
My producer did. And I could see what he meant, you know, but not really, no. I'd been trying to set up Mosquito Coast before Witness, and I'd been down in Belize, which is where we did shoot it there. And one morning in Belize, this is, as I say, prior to Witness, we were standing waiting to cross in a vehicle across a flooded river, and coming the other way, the punt coming back across, had these strange black-clad figures standing there in their hats and bonnets. And at first I thought, you know, people coming home from a party, you know, and I said, what are they? And they said, oh, Amish. There's a lot of Amish in Belize. I was fascinated by them. So that stayed in my mind, and then Mosquito Coast fell apart, and suddenly there was Witness. So it seemed like an echo of that day I saw. It was like an omen, a portent. Something was coming, I always thought. So that's probably how I thought of it more. Also, I thought it was fascinating. This was a living museum. These were people in the United States of America who had congressional approval to leave school in the sixth form, who had permission not to serve in the army, who lived and spoke in high Deutsch, German. I mean, this was extraordinary to me. I didn't know why it wasn't more people talked about it. So I was able to go also into America, into another world. It wasn't like doing Mean Streets, I couldn't do that. But I could do that. Amish.
Speaking of the Mosquito Coast, I know at one point you were pursuing Jack Nicholson for the lead. How do you feel that would have changed the tone of the film?
I think radically, but it just didn't happen. And Harrison was very keen to do it, and we'd worked so successfully on Witness. And Jack, we just couldn't make the deal. The producer could not make a financial deal that made sense with Jack's people. So.
When I was 10 years old, my parents took me to see Witness in a theater. And then within a year or so, I saw Mosquito Coast on cable or VHS. They both left a big impression on me. First, in Witness, I really felt like I was seeing the world through the eyes of this small Amish boy. And that train station scene before the murder is really magical. And Mosquito Coast, the image that I most vividly recall was the family on the raft, weathering the storm, which to me was a great parable for the family, and it kind of fed into my deepest, darkest fears, of my little world. Did you, at any point, think about an audience? Did you think that these films could be viewed by an entire family?
Yeah, well, I don't know about children. Sometimes you think, because I had children growing up. One of them here, fully grown, with me, my daughter Ingrid. But so I was aware of children and what they like and don't like, and these were adult films. They weren't for children, I didn't think. But the audience, I thought of all the time. Always, I'm thinking, what will they think? What will they feel at this point? What do I want them to feel? And the other director talks like that a lot, but I mean, I'm sure a lot of directors think like that. But Hitchcock always talks about that, doesn't he? The audience. So that's the way I always... I wouldn't change something in order to please them. It was just simply they were part of what I was doing. They were going to make the film whole by watching it. The last making of the film is the person watching, because they bring their sensibilities, their emotions to join you. So you have to reach them, you have to get past logic into the unconscious. And then when the apparatus shuts down here, logic and reason, and you're just gliding on emotion, you're back to the child, you're open to wonder. Not easy to get to that, it doesn't happen all the time, but so therefore I'm talking about them because they will help me complete the film.
Do you think it's... Well, what's your opinion of what's become today of film, the lack of mature themes and subject matter, things that you echo in your films?
Well, you know, I know more than you do. It's a confusing period. But I tend to think we've weathered a tsunami before in the film industry, which was sound. If we were talking, and it was, 1929, 28, 29, 30, saying what's going to happen. Because we have to realise they lost an art form. They didn't just get sound, they lost an art form. If you read particularly Jean Renoir, he talks about it, that the silent film was a different experience entirely to what we see. The nitrate had a quality, a glow. Yes, we know there may be music, but the experience of these big close-ups and the way they shot them because they didn't have dialogue, he said created what he can only call a kind of hypnotism or mesmerism in the cinema between the viewer and the screen, the result of the screen. And so it's gone, it's swept aside. Now we know a lot of times because people couldn't speak, they had foreign voices, whatever. But we then know this terrible sound period came in with a boxy camera, a huge camera, microphones where the actors had to lean over and stand under the same point. So I would think a lot of people at the time thought, well, that's gone, that art form is gone. Now we're going to get plays, we're going to get dialogue, and chat, yak. And for a period, that did happen. And there was within that still some gems.
And slowly, life came back and a new form of cinema emerged. Then it took the hit from television, which we're still taking. Really, I think the internet, small screens, all the screens are really television, that's gone viral. But I think we'll get through it. You know what I'm interested in? It is meeting filmmakers, young filmmakers here and elsewhere in Australia, Garth Davis, who did Lion. So there's a sort of interesting phalanx of filmmakers who love it and love the tradition that I was part of, who I didn't know were out there till I travelled a little. And it's up to them, I think. The men and women who want to make these films will have to find a way to shape it. Because I don't think television's the same. The mini-series, maybe 6 episodes. But otherwise, television, I think, is a writer's medium. I think the screen is a director's medium.
Why do you think the studios have gone backwards in terms of attempting to challenge the audience intellectually?
Why have they gone backwards?
Yeah.
World market. Children, mainly, watch more than once. So although their ticket price is lower, they'll go a lot to the same film. And probably in the old days buy it on DVD. So they began to study children, and horribly, and the certain stories children like. And then they were going into countries with little education in the third world. And they could tailor it for them. So I think these are marketing decisions that these companies have made, because that's what they're basically doing, is a business, making money. Yes, they like to go to the Academy Awards, and they like the parties, and they like Cannes, but fundamentally they've got to turn a profit, and they'll do it any which way. They'll go to China, as we see. So an era has passed. It's now out in the independent world that things happen.
One of the things I admire about your films is the very handcrafted look of all the films. And I imagine that it was a lot easier to do this when you're working on smaller budget films such as Hanging Rock and The Last Wave. But you seem to be an expert at doing it on a much larger scale with big budget films such as The Truman Show and Master and Commander. How do you manage to maintain this handcrafted look on films of such great scale?
Well, it just has to be that way. I mean, I know it's small detail, but I seem to buy props for most of the films, and
you personally
buy them, and have them in my own house, for a while. A little suitcase Jim Carrey had in The Truman Show I found and bought. I thought that was a lovely little case. I bought the main swords for Russell Crowe. They were on the back of his ship. I bought them from a swordsmith in London, and one of them had been a real naval officer's sword from that era. And these don't mean much in themselves, but it's like a little amusing. But everybody gets to hear about all the departments, that he likes authenticity, he likes it to be real. And when there's a million details, it can move a mountain. Each detail is like a little ant building a nest. And you can go crazy with it, but you have to be careful. But I think it's, whether a big picture or a little picture, they're all big, by the way. All the your film you're making is so big. Count Vim was as big as Master and Commander, my first short film. They were both huge for different reasons. And huge in the sense that you have a huge challenge to make it work.
Do you work with the same team in terms of your art department? Set designers?
Mostly, not always. My wife has worked in both costume, wardrobe and production design. My daughter did work for me with graphics in Master and Commander, simply because I knew she worked in another field. She's a designer anyway, but I said I need someone to really get the maps right, because they weren't right. So she flew out to Mexico to do that. Camera, yes, I've used, not always the same team, but there are certain people I'd like to use again.
Can you describe your working relationship with cinematographer Russell Boyd, and why did you two decide to work together again towards the end of your career?
Yes, we've done several films in Australia, and And then when I took Johnny Seal, the camera operator that we'd been part of our team, to America. So I had dinner with Russell, and before I made this decision, I said, would you mind, Russell, if I used Johnny? Would it...
Around what time were you talking?
Just before Witness.
Mm.
So I think it was 83 or something like that. And he said, no, not at all. Very generous man. No, I'd love Johnny to have a break. So Johnny and I worked for 3 films. Then I had other cameramen, and I lost touch with Russell. He was always shooting. And one day I was flying to LA for meetings on, my early meetings on Master and Commander, before the script. And there was Russell flying to Los Angeles. And so we sat together.
On the plane?
Yeah, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, it's this ship film. And he's a great sailor, as is many Australians love to sail, go on little sailboats. And so by the end of the flight, I thought, wow, what an interesting meeting. I liked the way he talked, and we could do it again. So let's have dinner. And 2 nights later, I said, do you want to do this thing, this, Master and Commander? Yeah, why not?
That's terrific. And just chance meeting on an airplane. Oh. Roger Corman was our guest here a few years back. What does Death Race 2000 owe to the cars that ate Paris?
Everything. He bought, apparently supposedly bought his agent, his man in Cannes, bought the cars that ate Paris to distribute. And he held it for a year. We kept saying, what's happening when you're releasing it? And he, soon. Then finally he said, no, I'm backing out of the deal. And it went to New Line Cinema. He said, at least arrange someone else for it. But I was shocked then to see him bring out this film. If it had just been in the marketplace that he saw my film, you would say it was, okay, homage. But the fact he kept it, anyway, not a happy story.
Sorry to hear that. There seems to be a consistent use of water in many of your early films. Is this a coincidence or just a convenient plot device, or does water have a deeper meaning in your films? I, as I said, grew up by the sea, but there was a point early on where some interviewer said, in the 70s, you're onto water, aren't you? Water's your thing. And I said, well, what do you mean? You describe several scenes with water in different films. I said, yes, it is fascinating. It is fascinating. But after the interview, I thought, I mustn't use it anymore. Because I don't want any tricks, like that. So I'm not aware of only when it's part of the story. Can you still do the types of projects that you would like to do in the current system?
Difficult, very difficult. I'm an odd case because I am, we worked in 20 years in the American studio system that we've been talking about, which has been, transmuted into another kind of business. And they don't make those films. It's not worth their effort. They do bigger budgets and sequel possibilities, important. So I'm back to the independent world, which was where I began. And my last film, The Way Back, was independent. And so I'm there I've got a script, and we talk about things, and maybe we do it here. But it's, a different thing. It's tough. It's hard.
It's kind of an interesting arc, no? Going from the independent to
back to my roots,
and back to your roots. And when you look back on your career, do you wish you had more opportunities to direct feature films in the 1970s?
Well, opportunities I created, so I didn't create them because I didn't find an idea I wanted to do. I don't think it's worth doing, really. It's not that hard to make a film. If you've got, love movies and a reasonable understanding, you get a good writer, you get a good camera, you get good actors, and you say, action. Then you say, cut. Unless you're like Alfred Hitchcock, watching him shooting Frenzy in London, he only said one word, the most important word, cut. So it's not that hard, but to make a good film, to make the sort of film you love, when you are enclosed in the film. Takes time to find the right material, right story.
Are the projects that you're currently looking at now, are they kind of in the vein or relative budget size of, say, like Most Dangerous Year? Would that be like the type of...
You're living dangerously?
You're living
Yes. I don't know, you'd have to compare the finances here, probably. But, you know, some of the budgets are too, I mean, for my project I might want to do it too small, I can't get too big with the budget. It's just a little tricky. But as far as projects go, what I'm offered through my agents and so on are all true stories. And it's always said to me as if it's a badge of honour. It's a true story. You know, as if thank God it's not fiction. I don't understand that. You know, it's... and so a lot of them I'm offered tend to be biographies and sort of historical incidents which don't interest me. My wife has a theory that 9/11 killed the fiction film for some time. It was so horrifyingly real that since then, real things, it's true, has the weight that fiction once had. Fiction's almost, unless it's fantasy, but an adult story that is made up. So what's your movie? It's called Rubber Eye or something. Yeah? What's it about? Who's in it? And then you start to say it's a sort of story of a man or something. If it doesn't have a hook of sort of the true story or something really startling, it's hard to get people interested to finance it. And many of the movies that we love would never have been financed because they don't have that kind of hook. So I think it's an interesting thing, this true story side of filmmaking now.
Do you currently have a project in development, and can you share anything about it at this point?
Yeah, no, I never would. You know, I mean, it's bad luck. But yes, I have something that I've been working on for some time.
And are you working on it with the intention of it being released theatrically? And will you only work on films that are released theatrically?
It's hard to say that. I would say yes, it is. It's a theatrical aiming for cinema. But, you know, there is now Amazon, Netflix, as we know, who may finance it, but maybe a week screening and then it goes on to their subscribers. But, you know, yeah, you have to survive. You know, that's if the rules have changed.
Okay. We're going to open it up to the audience and take some questions. I'll give you this in case you have los micrófonos a la audiencia. Primera pregunta.
Hi. In English? Hi. First of all, thank you for your attention for you film directing. Thank you so much. I would like to know. I'm aware that projects are different and actors in every project are different, but if you could share a little bit of your directing actors technique, if it could be possible.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you direct your actors?
Yes. I think no rehearsals. I don't like them. Sometimes I've done it. I like to spend time having dinner. I love location because you're isolated. And talk not about the subject or the person that they're going to play, but talk around things. I think a lot of communication is non-verbal. It comes through other ways, through you're picking things up about a person, aren't you? I mean, life. So I think the actor and I, who are very high state of sensitivity because you're going to make a film, I'm picking up things from them, and they're picking them up from me. And I think by the time it comes to shoot, there should in a way be no acting. Acting is finished. They should be that person, really, in a way. And I try to create an atmosphere in which it's impossible not to be the person. It's, I want to believe it's really happening in some strange way. Not, it might sound crazy, but it's a certain way. Now, firstly, it's the casting. You've got to get the casting right, otherwise that won't happen with a person. But we can reach such a pitch that with that actor, there is some sort of telepathy. And you don't talk about it, but they'll finish a take and they'll look over at you and there'll be maybe a little nod. And I said, there's just something about, yes, I know. I haven't said anything, let's go again. And they do this other thing. It's very interesting. Only with certain actors, but it can happen, it's wonderful.
No. You can do the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, you said something very interesting about the hook that's needed to get some people engaged in your films, and specifically the part about the true story. You used the Picnic on Hanging Rock, which is, well, the film states that it's a true story, but of course it's not. But I've read several anecdotes and several, researches about it, and one of the most interesting anecdotes that I read, and I wanted to ask you if it was true, was that on one of the first days of shooting, the character that played Miranda was all dressed up, and you told her to take a break, and Jane, the author, just saw her and said, "Oh, Miranda, it's been so long since I last saw you," and the actress said that the emotion was so real. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and about why you chose to say that it was a true story, like the movie?
Firstly, the true story statement, it doesn't quite say that. It's a little more enigmatic. And this is from the book, put onto the screen. Whether the events that occurred long ago are true or false need not concern you or something, as the characters involved are long since dead. At least that's in the book. So I didn't ever ask Joan Lindsay. Well, I was told, don't ask her about is it true. And so I didn't. And I didn't ask her because I didn't want to know, really. And it didn't matter because people disappear. And they disappear in the bush. So that's true. And I left that little, and it was a tease, yes. As for Miranda and her meeting with Joan Lindsay, I didn't see it. I read about it too, or heard about it later. Joan came to visit us one day, and she did like the look of her very much, Miranda, Anne Lambert, who played the part.
Hi. What do you think, in your own experience and perspective, besides getting excited with the project and have talent, it's some of the qualities that will help you to be a good director?
Are you a director?
Well, I want to be. I've made some shortfilms.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any, of course, neat answer. Somebody asked me why I chose directing, and I said it was like getting caught in the rain. It just happened. I think be open. I think do writing. I think writing. Even if you don't publish it or it's not a script, but I would get into the exercise of writing short stories. Just the habit of telling a story, just as I mentioned, telling a story to those executives. Once upon a time, it's sort of good for the muscles. I mean, we go to gymnasiums, people all over the world, lift weights, do all of that. What about the imagination? I'm in Louis Buñuel, working with Jean-Claude Carrière on a series of films. They would go. I was talking to Daniel to the country to work on the script. And part of the ritual every day was to tell each other every day a story or a dream they had. Didn't matter if the story was true or not, but just to get this mechanism, lift the weights of the brain, of the imagination, and you can make it stronger and more muscles. So writing's very good. A little acting doesn't hurt. If you can find a little, maybe act in someone's movie. Know what it's like to stand on the other side of the camera. And reading. Apart from watching movies. But and finally, I would say to try and keep the unconscious open. We spend now so much of our time with the conscious brain working with the internet and texting and whatever. You have to have time to be bored, as I said. Because if you're bored, you daydream. And if you're working on something, you can go, oh my God. Or you're just sitting here like this, like here, and I can see on the stage here, quite a large ant. I wonder where it came from. No, I'm making that up, but that I can't do if I'm texting, I just noticed that ant. Would that be interesting in the script? In the middle of the high-rise building on the 79th floor, during the meeting, an ant walks across the table. Yeah, that could be good. But that can only come through a kind of keeping the door open to the unconscious, which holds treasures we can't even measure.
¿Te pregunta?
Sí. Sí.
¿Le dan el micrófono? Bueno, aquí atrás primero y después.
Hi, you talk about horror movies, horror English movies. I suppose it to be Hammer films. I want to talk more about how these movies inspired you and what's your opinion about bad tastes at horror in Australia, like Alvin Purple and Patrick. Do you see this film? How about this?
Well, the horror films, when I was young, is just loving really the more subtle ones. It was really, I was susceptible to footsteps, to a branch rubbing against a window, to somebody whispering, and you're in a house on your own and you can hear. I mean, that's enough for me. I'm there. So some of those early horror ones, yes, of course they had, the beast, the monster, whatever, but I took from them, I think, the build-up to it, to the reveal. As for other films, we're kind of kitsch films. It's really another taste, somebody else's taste, that's fine, not mine. We find what we need.
Ahora sí. Depende del micrófono.
Hi, Peter. I love The Truman Show. It's one of my favorite movies ever. And you talk a lot about some subconscious. It's really important. I remember reading Norman Mailer's book. He says about writing. He talked about the importance of subconscious, and I found in your movies a lot of this mix between drama and comedy. What are your thoughts about how the subconscious work on your film work, on your work?
Well, it's only the conscious can talk. I'd like to hear from the unconscious. I think I access it, actually. I think I access it through music. During a very heightened period of working on something. It's not just the normal life. I have a certain number of pieces of music I've collected, put onto one, what was once CD, and play them, play this one, play that one, usually non-vocal, instrumental or classical, or tribal, whatever I feel is relevant, more or less, to the story, or will get me going. If it's vocal, then it has to be foreign language that I can't understand. And when I put the music on headset, it blocks the radar. I call it jamming the radar. I stop, the conscious mind can't really effectively work. And I just go into a kind of trance, really, I think, almost, so to speak. And from that, one, I have a little holiday from my conscious mind. And two, ideas can occur of what to do. Or unbidden thoughts come. Things have never occurred. But it's firstly you have to leave the door open for these thoughts to come. I stopped reading newspapers. I stopped on film, stopped listening to any outside chatter, so that I reduce the amount of things coming through that would bother me in my mind.
Maybe it doesn't have to do with so much about films, but when you came to Mexico, before you came, the world says, and some neighbors of ours have strange expressions about our country. What was your feeling and your idea? I mean, you're coached by a lot of people that will show you a good, deep professional, or what is it, deep going Mexico. But what were your feelings? What are they now? And, well, it would be wonderful if we could have you more often around here. You're really splendid.
I'm willing to come back. I'm feeling, as a third time, drawn here. I haven't a clue what's going on, but it's very loamy soil. It's very fertile soil here. I know it's got a lot of blood in it, but it's grown in film these great artists like truffles in these last years. You can't manufacture truffles; they grow where they want to, and they need the right soil. So you've had these several directors of remarkable talent. So it's I just enjoy visiting here and getting past the headlines. Because when you're not here, of course, it's like in Australia you'll read about bushfires. Here we read about the drug cartels. You can start to get a cliche, or the war. So it's great to get past the headlines to some real life.
Hi. I wanted to ask about your, for your films, if there's a difference between the ones that you've written and directed and the ones that you've directed and come on after they've been written. You wrote a lot of stuff at the beginning of your career, and a lot of that American system stuff that you came in and made, a lot of your extremely popular stuff was written beforehand, but it sounds like you make a lot of stories that you come on to your own, in the sense that reading them and pitching them in your own voice. But I just want to see if there's any sort of nuance different in terms of the way you approach it, the way that you feel about it after it's been made, or.
I think with the firstly, as a writer, it's my second suit. It's I'm less of a writer, better at directing than writing. But you have to write sometimes, like the early days. Nothing better than co-writing. If I get just American scripts from a writer, I had to work with the writer to make it mine. I would joke with them and say in the beginning, I have to, like a joke, I have to eat your script so that it goes all through my body, into the blood and everything. I said, it doesn't become my script. I am the script. Joke. Some writers were a bit surprised. And I say, I need you to help me do this, but I must walk on. When I walk onto that set, I am the single authority to come to. I may not know exactly what to do, but I know more than anybody else about this story at that point. People could surprise you and give you something, I don't know. As for writing, I think the danger of original screenplays, when I've written original stories, is you can be too hard on yourself, I think. It's great when you have another writer that you can say, well, let's change it, but you're not too impassioned. But writing my own stuff, I find one day I think it's great. Wow, what a day's work. Come next morning, what absolute rubbish, rip it up And in the end, you can maybe destroy a good idea.
Hi Peter, I'm going to ask you about Truman Show. I'm also a big fan of that movie, and in the TV video they just show us, it says that it was like reading like this sci-fi kind of idea, and which makes sense because it's very similar to other type of things that Andrew Niccol, the writer, has done. And I want to ask you about how was the process of maybe like interpret that screenplay. I think he was not written by also someone else. So how do you find these things? Because I think it has a very unique tone and rhythm.
This is the Truman Show, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The Truman Show, yes. So how was the process of?
Yes, interesting. The original draft, Andrew Niccol, original screenplay. Also directed now, has done many films. Gattaca, excellent. New Zealand guy. Anyway, Andrew wrote The Truman Show. Spielberg was interested, and a couple of other people, but they let it go. It was very dark. It was set in New York. Andrew always thought John Travolta would be the lead. He was an alcoholic. It had a lot of the comedy things, but it was very intense and full of pain. My first thought was it was one of the most wonderful screenplays I've ever read. But I don't think it would have a worldwide audience. They would not sit down at night to watch a soap opera of such pain that wasn't, typical soap opera. So first thing I did was to move it to a beach, sunny setting, like a holiday was better. We have a long-running soap opera in Australia like that, where they're by the sea. And then began to work with Andrew. We worked very well together and reshaped it, rewrote it. Then I worked with Jim. Jim and I just hit right off straight away. First meeting. We were just sitting down to have a coffee, and I said something like, there's so many ideas we could have, Jim. For example, what about the bathroom mirror? In the morning maybe you could talk to yourself in the mirror. He said, that's great, so let's go down to the bathroom. So we just met, so we're down into the bathroom, and he gets his shaving cream, and it's virtually the scene from the film, just drawing it. And I said, that's great, it was very funny. And so we spent the afternoon, because I had begun in sketch comedy too, so I was also used to improvising and making things up. So it was transformed, really, but the script is Andrew's, the story is Andrew's. But we did a lot of work on it, months and months and months, rewrite. It had to be right. It had to have its logic right. We couldn't miss a beat, and so it needed that intense screenplay, script work.
Hello, Mr. Weir. Thank you very much for coming. I don't know if you'll find this funny or not, but I actually majored in screenwriting, and we spent a semester learning dramatic structure through the Truman Show. I don't know if you find that like interesting or hilarious, because one thing that looking back at your filmography, one thing that really strikes me is that I don't really find very many ways to link these movies until I see your name in the directed by credit. I see Dead Poet Society, the Truman Show, Witness, Fearless, all these great movies that I don't find a way to link them until I see your name on them. So I'm actually interested in as to knowing what draws you to these stories, what draws you to as to want to tell these very unique, very these are stories that at first glance don't seem...
I got your question. Can I answer it? No, sorry, I didn't mean to be rude.
Don't worry about it.
No, I just tell this little story. I was conflicted between young, back there, and I made a couple of films, but whether really to pursue a sort of purely artistic route or a commercial route, art and commerce was the talk. Hollywood was wicked, and European films were holy. Anyway, I was arguing with this, and then I was making a little documentary on a potter, and his mentor was a Japanese potter called Shiga. He was in Sydney, and I filmed Shiga and cooking his pot. And so I was talking about art and commerce and things to Shiga. And Shiga said, well, you know, our great art form is, well, one of them is calligraphy, but was always pottery. And it took all your life to be an apprentice. And then if you were any good toward the end of your life, you became a master. But most importantly, we made only utilitarian objects, cups, bowls, plates. We didn't sign them in the old days, but you made them with all of the skill at your command for ordinary people to use. And every now and again, the gods touched your hands. And that was a work of art. And it freed me in that second from the artist as God. And that one should just be a craftsman to the fullest extent, the best you can be. So I like to think my films are like those bowls. They're really for people to use. The artist, you know, I sign them, but it doesn't matter. I just want them to have something from them.
Oh, here. Peter.
Yes.
Yes, over here. Documentary films, do you watch them? Are you interested in documentary filmmaking? What do you think about
I am since last night. I saw Brimstone and Fire, and wow. Again, you know, film's a film. It happens to be called documentary, but that's a kind of poem. I'm interested in anything that works, you know. You can have prejudices against certain things, then you'll see something that completely shatters it, and you'll say, well, I don't normally like films about drug addiction, but have you seen so-and-so, you know? So I tried a few of them, but I was never very good, because I think I was drawn to over-dramatising. I mentioned this potter, the Australian potter, his friend was Shiga. Peter, he'd been a prisoner of the Japanese during the war, and I said, wow, how interesting, now you have a Japanese who is your mentor. He said, that's right. I said, so doing this documentary, I think it'd be great to recreate the Japanese POW camp in Singapore, and we'll have an actor playing you young, with the guards and everything, and frightened, and then cut to Shiga, you know, now today. And he said, oh no, I wouldn't want to do that. I said, why? He said, oh, it's offensive to the Japanese, you know, I want to just do a documentary. I said, oh, fine, okay.
Otra pregunta?
Sí.
¿Dónde?
Hi. I'm a little bit afraid to ask this question. Do you think that director can be made in a school? Because sometimes, well, it's my perspective. Everyone wants to direct a project, and you are in, I don't know, in some project working. In my case, audio. And everyone starts to give their opinion, and sometimes it's just a mess. And for me, it's more like a process. It's something that you, obviously, the school give us a lot of information, but it's more like a process than to be a director. I don't know. What did you think?
Well, it's hard to comment on your case, but in my case, I was never a good student. I think I prefer to learn on my own in a way, and also I'm the result of really an apprenticeship system, making short films. Yeah, I find it difficult to I would not, I think, be a good film student, but then maybe there's a school somewhere that it would work. But the best teaching is making. And writing is the cheapest thing of all. We were talking earlier about that. I'd be writing. It doesn't cost anything. Does that take I'd had some students once, we just worked on a desktop. You had to make a movie on the top of a desk, big desk, an office desk. You could put anything you like on it, but there had to be just one shot. One shot, and you had to tell a story. You couldn't have actors in it. And they went away saying, that's very difficult. And then they came up with some very interesting ideas. Some obvious ones, a suicide note. Somebody who's hiding something, has got a lot of locks on the door, on the drawer. Something leaking from inside the desk, dripping down onto the floor. Could be blood. What could be in the desk that is bleeding? So exercising, it comes back to that imagination thing all the time, rather than just making a movie about social problems or the latest scandal type thing. You have to teach yourself.
Tenemos tiempo para uno más. Yeah, señorita.
Working with the Aboriginal actor David Gulipil in making The Last Wave, also as an Australian director, working with those tensions between the Aboriginal community and European.
There was wonderful and unforgettable experience working with tribal people. Very difficult to get permission. This was 1978, I think, and I had a government guide who was urban, non-tribal Aboriginal. He said there's only one people from Groote Island in the north. They've never been really settled. They could do this. Nanjiwarra could play the old man. David Gulpilil already was tribal, had done the movies with Walkabout. So I brought them to the city. They were put in by the sea in caravans so they could bring their dogs and they could bring some family. And we made the film. But many interesting things happened, very strange things. There was definitely, English was the least communication. It was not his first language, or David's, but it was, they could read you, as it were, and pick things up out of the air. A lot of what David said and the old man said are in the movie. I put them in there. The old man saying, the law is more important than the man. He says to the lawyer, he says, surely it's the other way around from the Western view. The law must serve man. No. That was Nanjiwarra. David Gulpilil talking about communicating through his body. His brother would come through his arm, I think, like a telephone. It would begin to move and he would know his brother wanted to talk to him. What we called ESP, I suppose. Extrasensory perception is just common, normal. And I had to be careful because sometimes David could mimic you. He didn't understand what you were talking about, but he would repeat it perfectly. David, I think you should do that with him. You should come quickly and run down the street. Yeah, come quickly and run down the street. I'd say, yeah. He'd say, what? I said, that's it, run down the street, like this. Oh, like that.
Bueno, una más.
Since you mentioned Stanley Kubrick's work, the impact it had on you, I want to know what's your favorite movie of him and why?
What is my favourite Kubrick movie?
Yeah.
I'm not much of a one for favourites, really, of anything. Top 5, top 10, and none of that. It's kind of... and I just don't think of it like that. So with Kubrick, currently things change, don't they? You know, you can move from one thing to another and back. I really liked Lolita of late, and seen it again several times. In fact, I was interested in the scene where Peter Sellers is out on the veranda of the detectives' convention, and Humbert comes out, having left Lolita upstairs. He's very tense. And Peter Sellers is shot, I think, from the back, and says, Oh, I saw you got that lovely lady. You know, I saw you coming down. She's a very attractive lady. I guess she's your daughter or what? You know, I don't know. Sorry, you're a very nice person. And so I went to meet Stanley eventually. He arranged to have some time together, wonderfully. And when I first met him at the train station where he picked me up in England, he said, "Oh, come on out, it's, we're going up in the car, you know." And so later, I said to him, "Stanley, Peter Sellers, my God." He said, "Yeah, Peter Sellers, I'm an incredible guy." And I said, "And what about he did you, right?" It's so funny. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "On the veranda, when you said, 'No, that's not me.' No, he didn't know me. That's a famous American racetrack guy. He's, I thought, that's what Peter Sellers told you."
Bueno. Last question right there.
You talked a lot about the relationships you build with your actors. I just want to know if you learned anything from them, or from a particular actor taught you something, or learned something from this relationship.
Oh, many times. Many times I've learned from actors. When you've cast a part correctly, and if they have training, therefore they can, just like a violinist, they can play it in one key or another, they can talk like that without losing their connection to the character. It's the most wonderful experience, and then it's a real sharing. But don't forget, screen acting is so different to this stage, because you are hiring part of their persona. So when you're sitting opposite, I'm sitting opposite in the casting thing, forget stars, and we're talking, I'm really trying to pick up, like the Aborigines, as much as I can about them. Chatting about not the script. And I'll do tests where I'll just play a piece of music and I'll say, "Do you mind, this first thing we'll do is I've got some lovely music which I think is apropos the film a little bit. I think, could you just be sitting in the chair, what would you think, reading a book? You could be doing something, you could be asleep if you like. And I'll just look at you with the camera. Then we'll do some other little test. I'll say, okay, the interview situation for a job, okay? Let's say you're applying for a job in, what do we do? Let's say in the police department or something, and you be what do you want to be, the policeman or I'll be the policeman? So we'll get the desk and make up something, nothing to do with the script. And then we're laughing. It's silly. I don't do this with everybody, but I'm starting to get a feeling of the person. And they of me. And I think when it clicks, it's the most wonderful collaboration.
Muchas gracias, Peter.